All right, thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Hello, everyone. My name is Vinay, and I would like to welcome all of you to LexTalk.World web conference. LexTalk.World is a 360-degree media solution for legal professionals from all or different categories, where we have a monthly magazine, industry leaders interviews, web conferences and conferences taking place and organizing multidimensional approach and assist legal fraternity to connect, learn, and grow. Today, we have two very important topics to discuss, and we are honored to have such great panelists with us who will be sharing their expert advice and views. In our first session, we will discuss on the way forward for the legal industry worldwide in the times of COVID-19. And post this, we have another amazing group of experts to throw light on law in the era of artificial intelligence. To start with, I would like to initiate the first panel discussion, which is the way forward for the legal industry worldwide in the times of COVID-19. In the panel today, we have Mr. Reinhard von Hennings. He is chairman and founder of Bridge House Law LLP USA, a North Carolina-based law firm with offices in United States, Canada, and America, and Germany. He is admitted to practice law in North Carolina, Germany, Georgia, as well as with the United States Supreme Court. He comes with over 25 years of experience in the international legal business community. Reinhard is also going to moderate the panel for us today. Thank you, Reinhard. Next, we have Mr. Sanjeev Gupta. He is awarded for his corporate M&A expertise. Satyajit is a dual qualified lawyer, India and England, with nearly 17 years of experience in top law practices. He is now Vice President, Assistant General Counsel, and Head of India Legal at EXL Services. Satyajit's work encompasses general corporate matters, labor, employment law, contracting, IT, and privacy laws. We also have Ms. Deepa Lakshmi Vedivalan with us. She is General Counsel India in APAC at Quest Corp Limited, India. Deepa Lakshmi comes with diverse experience in cross-border transactions involving APAC, Americas, and Europe, strategic global alliances, M&A activities, compliance on data protection, legal compliance training, employment laws, contract and management, and work related to intellectual property. With that, we also have Mr. Suraj Singh with us. He is head of legal at Novartis Healthcare India. He comes with wide experience of heading the legal departments of large MNCs with around 20 years of experience in pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, and ITES industries. Member of the senior leadership team providing strategic legal advice on regulatory compliances, employment, litigation, and other legal issues. He has also been listed in GC Power List 2018 by Legal 500. With that, I would like to hand over the platform to Reinhard to take this forward. He will be moderating the session. And we will also be doing a Q&A at the end of the session. So if in case you have more questions, please feel free to send them in the Q&A box to us, and we will definitely try and answer as much as we can. Reinhard, over to you.
Perfect. And short of being very excited about being here virtually with you, I wish we could be in the same room and shake hands, but maybe this will have to wait for a little while. What measures do law firms take? And let's start with my own experience. What measures did we take as Bridge House Law in our daily operation in light of COVID? We did two things. Number one is we did a daily huddle where in the morning we all make a wealth and health check-in. How are you feeling? What's good? Because there's a human touch to all of our work. And the second part is we have a daily intellectual challenge. What can we do with our own resources to make something we have not done before? General Motors is making ventilators. What is it we as a law firm can do to offer, which we have not done before, which is part of our expertise, but still we have not utilized it. So with that said, Deepa, what are you doing in your firm? What are your experiences in-house?
Hey, Rana. Thanks, Vinay. Hi, everyone, and privileged to be part of this panel. Today, as Rana highlighted, the challenge is what we go through today due to COVID. No one could have envisaged a few weeks ago. At this point of time, I think legal fraternity as well as an in-house councils are expected to be a multidisciplinary task force to address the wide range of issues. As an in-house council, what we have done, we have quickly set up the task force to work out our business and operational strategy on a day-to-day basis and started evaluating our contractual obligations and liabilities, and constantly communicating with our clients, workforce, operations, safety measures, and well-being within our system. With this context, I think we can move on for detailed discussion in the later part. I would like to pass it on to Satyajit.
A second. Thanks, Deepa, and thanks, Vinay and Reinhard. I think we'll cover a number of issues here, but I think quickly, just to as an introduction, I would be looking at issues that obviously legal issues which have sort of come under focus in the COVID and which will come under the post-COVID era, whether it's force majeure, whether it's issues around labor employment, whether it's issues around how you contract with on a long-term basis with your stakeholders. I think a number of them. And of course, most importantly, I think all of us in some way will touch upon what in-house legal departments are looking forward to from law firms. I think that's a very key ask. I think efficiency, cost effectiveness, and definitely ability to spread across and cover multiple disciplines is required. I think with that, I will hand it back to Suraj. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Satya. Yes, I think, three of us here are from in-house industry, and we will talk from our experiences, and I, not only being an in-house lawyer, I also work for a pharma company. So, I'm that pharma guy who actually gets asked a lot of questions. What are you guys doing, being in a pharma company? When are you getting that, vaccine in this era? And also, we will be, as other panelists spoke, we will be covering wide range of topics. In fact, one of the questions that I would also be handling is, about the authorities asking us certain questions, especially on the details of the employees, their medical history, especially if they have actually traveled in the recent past. What are the privacy concerns that we will keep in mind before we respond to authorities? So these are some areas that we will cover in the following minutes. So I will hand the baton back to Reinhard. You are on mute, I think, Reinhard.
Great. So now the real excitement goes down to the question, what are we seeing right now? What are the challenges we as legal professionals have in the current time of COVID? Deepa, would you like to kick us off on that one?
Thanks, Reinhard. I think it's a good question to begin with. As I said, some of the key issues we handle as part of our daily routines are evaluating the contractual obligation and liabilities, be it a customer or a supply chain related transactions or facility related transaction. I think many of us been hearing some of the jargons like force majeure, right? That gets attracted in at this point of time, and we've been reevaluating our terminations option in the clauses, KPIs, SLAs, and etc. It goes on. I think this can be discussed in detail as part of our webinar. And the second part, which is a key critical we believe in, which is an asset to an organization, is in workforce management. We are going through a turbulence situation with handling and workforce management, especially handling and labor and employment related issues, whether can we invoke and furlough, can we terminate the contractors, or how can we onboard the new employees, policies and process regarding working from, I think, which is the new normal for all of us. And M&A transaction, where we are evaluating the material adverse impact clause, or is it possible to raise a fund at this point of time, or can we able to expand the domestic or international business opportunity, privacy, information security, compliance, and it goes on. See, beside this day-to-day routine work, I think we do support and proactively advise the management on the evolving business strategy, new business line, and transformation process. And as I've been repeatedly saying that the legal professionals are expected to be a strategic business partner by providing the creative and proactive legal guidelines, rather just be a support function. I think with this, I can definitely say that and see that COVID will turbocharge the legal industry transformation, wherein we all will move into the digital age and can able to reshape the legal industry landscape. I think I have been seeing personally, one thing is certain, when this pandemic abates, maybe within 3 months or 6 months, maybe optimistic, it looks optimistic, life will be different for all of us. COVID may create a new historic divide for us, maybe before COVID or after COVID. It's like an BC and AC can be interchanged for all of us in the industry, maybe. And with respect to when I would like to use the external law firm, I think the considering the volume and the issues, it is definitely not able to manage within in-house. So we've been looking for the external law firms and consultant supports here. What are the key things when I am evaluating or shortlisting the law firm? As an in-house counsel, we expect the external law firm should be an extended arm of my in-house team as well as my function, who can be approachable at any point of time, who should be having a greater domain expertise, which is relating to my industry and my business, and capable of providing the pragmatic solutions to complex issues. Last but not least is the budget definitely plays a critical role while shortlisting these kinds of law firms. When it comes to the law firm or the private practice, I think there will be a big change for the way lawyers in private practice or traditional law firms works. Perhaps I think Reinhard with this law firm background could do justice and share his experience or his thoughts on this for the benefit of all of us. Over to Reinhard. My question to you is, how do you foresee the law firm will look like or respond after COVID?
And I'm completely with you, Deepa. There is a B, C, and an AC. And I believe right now law firms will fail who don't see that there's a change needed. When we are not able to change the situation, we need to change ourselves. We need to change the law firm operation, and those who don't change will fall. However, those will be successful who adapt to changes. We have later today the discussion about AI. I can see that law firms are substituting some entry-level lawyers with AI, but I can also see a switch in the law firm where the law firm traditionally does two things. It provides data analytics, it provides you the background, it researches the best clauses for force majeure, it researches the best clauses, but right now law firms have a chance to share their wisdom and their knowledge, which is beyond the analytical part, is more about what is the right decision. And that's where I believe law firms can help you in-house with the external expertise, because AI we can all buy. What it breaks down is the extra brain, the extra analytical part. And for law firms to survive, I can see that we are starting something like a gig economy, where law firms need more knowledge and more brain power, more on demand. So I can see outsourced lawyer, I can see gig economy lawyers who are ready to jump on specific topics which law firms don't cover traditionally. So our job as law firms is to create a quality control point of view and to create the right just-in-time environment, as we are all moving more towards a just-in-time scenario. So with that said, I believe it would be a good question to identify what is happening in the law world in general. How does the law change, and what are the new concepts of the law out in the market? Satyajit, what do you see will change in the legal world?
Thanks, Reinhard. I think great introduction and great segue into this topic. I think that's a question which comes to us from everybody, our teams, law firms, discussed across the 100 webinars which we would have all attended over the last 100 days. Uh, I think the issue, or rather the concern, and really the answer to that is, I think, and which I'm going to go into and maybe take a couple of minutes, is that really the fundamentals of law have not changed. So I think that's one issue, and that's one, thing which everybody sort of obviously struggles with. And when this entire process started, when we started looking at contracts, when we started looking at our long-term contracts, and started looking at whether we could get rent abatements, whether we could get better rates, deferment of payments, etc. The two things we we were faced with. One is, of course, the fact that, look, if you invoke force majeure, if you invoke any of these clauses, the usually the stakeholders usually on his way out slowly, and you don't get much beyond sort of immediate respite. In 2 months or 3 months or 6 months, whenever we reach the post-COVID or after COVID world, as Deepa very rightfully said, then we have to find somebody who works with us as well as as well as the other partners did. So that was one issue. And the other bit is government support. I think a lot of these cases, especially in in India, we have seen that government support, while has had to be strategized and has had to be given to certain I would say marginalized parts of society. So obviously government couldn't afford to waive rent, waive people's interest, various other things like that. So I think when you look at these concepts, I think the concepts and the application haven't changed. What it does make it very important is that when we do contracts going further and in the future, we need to be very clear on what clauses we put in. Today I'm looking at contracts with our long-term partners, vendors. A lot of cases, there's no mention of a force majeure clause. In India, for example, I mean, while of course we are looking at a global scenario, has certain peculiar concepts of when a force majeure is applicable at all. So, in a case where there's a real estate agreement, a lease, for example, force majeure per se, doctrines of frustration, etc., don't apply. So I think, just to sort of sum up, I think a lot of these concepts, while, they've become buzzwords right now, need to be, we need to go back to the drawing board when we need to make sure that our contracts, while of course, COVID and coronavirus is probably once in a lifetime, issue, but definitely we need to work harder on getting those contracts up to the mark. I think that's where the partnership with law firms, the partnership with experts, other experts, financial, tax, etc., comes in. I think, and I will hand it back to you with, of course, a request, Reinhard, that as somebody from a law firm, we look upon you to get us into the after COVID world.
Thanks, Ajit. Great summary. And I also believe that a lot of challenges are out in the world where politicians and legislators are changing the law. And I've seen proposals out where landlords are being not allowed to make any forced evictions, or banks are not allowed to do any foreclosures. So one part is what we can change as lawyers. The other part is what's out in the industry. What struck my mind is, how do we deal with privacy and how do we do with security? So how could either cybersecurity implemented or personal privacy? And Suraj, that's your level of expertise. What do you see will happen on the privacy side?
Sure, thanks, Reinhard. There are these day-to-day questions that actually, come up to most of the, in-house counsels. I spoke about, the police asking the companies to, furnish some data, on the travel history. Even more than that, there are a lot of questions. Pharma sector is one sector which is exempt from the lockdown, restrictions. So which means basically the R&D units of pharma is still operational. The manufacturing units, which are trying to manufacture a medicine for COVID-19, are also functional. Which basically means that we are actually allowing, or in fact asking our employees to actually come to our factories, to our R&D units, which basically means during these lockdown days as well, These employees are stepping out of their homes, taking the company bus, traveling along with other, workers, stepping into our company. And there is always this risk of transmission of the virus, and what kind of data that can be collected from our employees. As a company, we want to safeguard their health. We don't want anybody who is COVID positive to actually enter our premises, because that would mean that there's a huge transmission of virus. So how do we really ensure that we get employees who are medically fit, who do not have these symptoms? We actually are sometimes required to ask our employees certain questions. What kind of a medical history do they have? Did they actually interact with anybody who has had these symptoms? These are the details which can come under the sensitive personal data. And we have these restrictions of actually collecting this kind of sensitive data. So we actually face this issue quite a bit, and in fact I had to flag it to our global data privacy team. And after taking certain consents and some kind of a privacy notice, we have put in a plan in place where we are taking some data, and we are restricting the employees to actually come only if they are completely healthy, but even taking some declarations. So we are balancing these privacy concerns with the need to actually operate our units. So yes, every day these are evolving, and yeah, we will actually have to see how it actually pans out in future.
Perfect. And future is almost a good segue to the next thought is every crisis creates an opportunity. So what are the opportunities we see? And the first question would then go to Deepal. How can tech companies develop legal AI bots during this lockdown time and thereafter?
Thanks, Rainer. I think it's an important question for the need of our hour. Before jumping on to the question straightforward, I just would like to take a couple of seconds to give the background to it. I think today the entire legal ecosystem got affected, be it in legal education or in-house counsel or law firm fraternity or a private practice or a judicial system or a litigation system, I can say that. However, we've been seeing that noticing that in a matter of weeks, I can see that legal education and judicial system, including the court proceedings, have been transformed. When it comes to other than an MNC organization, I have been seeing there are many organizations or transformation. I am okay. So I think I'm a strong believer of an technology, and I still recommend and advocate for that. Legal industry's development should be in phase with the technology advancement. I think many of the legal fraternity will second my views and appreciate that. Couple of reasons behind that being organization or a business are having a greater urgency to solve the growing list of complex challenges. And secondly, they always want to lead ahead of its competitor. So I think these two reasons really makes or force the organization to look at it, what would be the solution. With this context, we all know that there have been a lot of fundraising happening on series of funding is being given by different countries and emerging startup companies. I think organizations are ready to invest in the potential of the technology, maybe like AI-enabled solutions, which is the ability to support the new models, process or effective analysis of contracts for especially as an in-house counsels and manage it can indicate the revenue leakage as well. I think it's the good one. And definitely, I don't see any challenge in funding or funding related issues. And at this point of time, COVID, I think that one industry is going to flourish. I strongly recommend law firm or as well as in any tech industries to focus on this. Maybe our next session panelists would address about the AI and legal industry more in detail. And I am also looking forward to hear a lot. Thanks, Rainer.
Thank you, Deepal. Satyajit, what is the stakeholder management? How do you see termination of contracts going along where you have long-term sustainability versus cost crunching?
Thanks, Reinhard. I think excellent point. And I think, as you would have realized, I've cleverly tried to connect my second topic to my third topic by sort of saying that obviously the focus as of now when COVID hit us was we started looking at all our contracts, whether it's client contracts and which we had to adapt to work from home situations, and of course vendor contracts where we had to figure out what are the cost savings we could do. Now, initially we were in I would say, in a happy place where we said, look, these contracts have great clauses. We have really thought of many situations while handling them. But I think it's very important we realize that we need to reach out to the stakeholder first. If we just send them a notice, or if we just sort of push them, this is a crisis situation for everybody. I think we realized that the chances of them coming back with an aggressive counter response is quite high. I mean, in India, for example, if a party which owes you money does not pay, there's an insolvency regime which you can invoke and which you can probably push. But in this time, the local government has frozen that. So which means that really an ability to access courts is obviously limited. So keeping that in mind, we shifted immediately to a track of speaking to them, negotiating, dealing with the stakeholder in a slightly more convivial fashion, and we've achieved far higher rate of, on both sides, both vendor as well as client, customer, we achieved better results. The broad point and the broad which I wanted to make was that the method of doing this transaction is probably much more important than how fair or how right you are in terms of your legal position. And I think that's what I would recommend. And the second point, before I hand it back to you, Reinhard, is people don't realize that you may get a very good result in the short term, but in the long term you've got to work with the same customer, and you've got to go out and work with the same vendor. And if you push them too much now, you will get into a situation where they will not want to work with you later. So that's been our approach, and we've seen great results around that. It's very important that you take on a different hat while dealing with these managed stakeholders. Thanks so much, Reinhard. Handing it back to you.
Great, Satyajit. Great summary. Suraj, you're the visionary, and it's a far-fetched question, I know, but what are the likely repercussions in the current scenario?
Yeah, it's quite a difficult question. I think everybody is trying to answer that. Reinhard, in my view, work from home is going to become a norm. I think, the companies are all trying to look at this option, in fact, enable work from home. And, I just heard yesterday that the biggest IT company in the country, in India, is actually making 75% of its workforce to work permanently from home. This is the new norm. And there are some challenges in, actually getting this work from home done as well. For example, if you look at current regulations on work from home, for any IT company which is registered as an OSP under telecom rules, we still have very archaic rules. It says that, still there has to be a fixed line, point-to-point, connectivity between the employee and the company, which, it is very difficult for most of the companies to actually implement. So, if given these challenges, we will have to actually figure out how do we really enable this work from home. But good news is, I see that the government and especially the telecom authorities are actually exempting, many companies from this rule. So, I think in future, this is what we see. Most of us will work from home. And I think same way, even in your firm as well, right? I think most of your, associates will have to work from home. So this is something which we will have to understand.
So in other words, if you're in real estate, let's sell office buildings because they may no longer be needed. thoughts I had about what the future will bring is a question of what are our rights? We as citizens fought for centuries against governments to make sure that our rights are protected. This was part of the French Revolution, and it's an ongoing tendency to protect ourselves against the government. Right now, we see a government which gives us regulations, be it from a health point of view, stay-at-home orders, be it from a regulatory point of view, this machine cannot be operated. So one of the esoteric legal questions is a governmental regulation the same as a governmental taking from an eminent domain point of view? Are we losing anything which would then be forcing the government in order to compensate us? But I don't want to be too philosophical, because I can see an opportunity here for lawyers who are able to balance the weight between the public interest. We all want to stay healthy, and there is a need for this public regulatory work on the one hand, but also we are citizens. We want to go out with our kids. We want to go out with our families. We want our operations to work. We as businesses, we need our companies to be back to running. And this balancing act would need some lawyers who are specialized here. I can see law specialties being developed in the area of corporate restructuring. I can see it being developed in the area of bankruptcy. There's maybe some new HR components in. What are new rules which we need to draft to allow work from home? What are new rules about overtime? How do you deal with carpal tunnel and medical needs if you're at home and you don't have the right equipment? So those are things where lawyers can shine, but where really lawyers are needed is a brain to figure out what is it we as citizens want to have, what is it we as business want to have, and what is the role of the government. And I can see a new public-private legal profession being implemented right now. With that said, does anybody have any closing words from our panel? If that's not the case, there are, I believe, a couple of questions out from the audience. Let's kick on that. Deepal, do you have any thoughts?
I concur with your views, Reinhard. With the concluding context, right? So I strongly believe, with my personal opinion, I don't see any adverse impact to legal industry compared to other industry like tourism or hospitality. I can say actually legal team is in limelight today. We don't need to really worry. The one thing is the legal professional who are already started upskilling and transforming into the digital age are ahead of the curve. My two short-term mantras for all of us as a legal fraternity: one, don't stop what you are doing. Continue to interact with your clients, continue to interact with your workforce, and continue to interact with your regulatory authorities. The change is the way you do it. Definitely you need to change that, probably in a virtual mode or a digital form. Second aspect is all of us need to think differently, not as the conservative type or a traditional base. We need to definitely change that. With this context, keeping this as the outcome of our panel, I think we all can embrace the challenge through the change process. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
And change process is certainly the magic word. You know, the only constant in life is change. So let's face the change. And with that said, let's change the moderation back to Vinay. Thank you for giving us a chance. Let's jump in on a couple of those questions from the audience.
Yes, we have a few questions in the Q&A chat. Reinhard, can you see them? Are they visible to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can start picking up them, and if in case you want to answer them live or you want to type an answer, I think if you're live, we can answer them live and then we can keep striking them off.
Perfect. So the first question comes down: what are the key factors that boost the efficiency of law firms? And being the practitioner outside, I would say the efficiency of the law firm is really down to what Deepal also said, is communication. You need to make sure communication is out. And the second part is pricing. And if you have too much of an overhead of unproductive folks who may be brilliant, I believe therefore we have more gig economy where you are sourcing the needs when it is. So pricing and communication are things which really boil down to the efficiency. The second question is down: what are the main expectations of common citizens from law firms in a country? And I'm not sure who has a good answer on that one. It goes more to the citizens. What are the citizens' expectations to the law firms?
I wanted to just hazard a guess. I think it's a very probably a very interesting question, not something that I've seen. But just to talk of I think it's not so much common citizens per se, but I think what do all of us look forward from lawyers today? And I think because post COVID, I've been getting a lot of questions from friends, from family, from people in the same locality, the resident, the co-op guys. I think broadly they need a lot of guidance, and I think that's something which is very important. So I think law firms and law firms have been stepping forward. I must compliment law firms across the world. They've built up, I think while COVID was going on, they built up the resources very quickly. A lot of resources are available publicly. I think a lot of common questions around, security of housing, security of financing, how people will be dealt with by, in terms of social security. A lot of those questions do come up, and we've seen a lot of law firms and lawyers have stepped up and given that advice pretty much pro bono. So I think that is coming through. I think Deepal had something to add, or maybe a different point, so I will hand it back to her.
Thanks, Adil. To add on to this, couple of points precisely. One, I think as a citizens, the non-legal team or the individuals always expects the awareness on the legal requirements or notification what's happening as on today, right? From India perspective, we have already received 800 plus notifications. So they are clueless whether the lockdown is lifted or lockdown continues. I think if these kinds of awareness is being created with a simple manner, or social distancing can be created in a simple way of do's and don'ts, I think that is one expected from the legal fraternity. And second, any citizen, if they would like to reach out, I think they are expecting the law firm to be the one-stop solution at this point of time to get the clarifications. And definitely, if the landlords or the tenants or force majeure related issues are cropping up, many of the customers or vendors are looking for a law firm support, very, very cost-effective support. That is a key mechanism which everybody is looking for. Probably the law firm has to relook at their financial models, or as well as building the pipeline of this cost-effective model.
Perfect. I see a great question which goes down to the unrest in startups and MSMEs with regard to payment of wages when there is no business. And maybe we can all share our knowledge and thoughts. What is a suitable way to handle the scenario for startups and MSMEs? If there's no immediate...
I can maybe pitch in here.
Would you like to take?
Sure. There have been a lot of notifications, again, just the way Deepa was talking about, especially on the question of whether we can lay off especially the contract employees. And there have been some kind of notifications again from the government itself coming that you cannot actually terminate the employment of workers, especially the contract employees. And I do know that this was taken up all the way to Supreme Court of India, I know for a fact that there was a judgment very recently that you cannot cut the wages, you cannot terminate their employment. You will still have to continue their work even if they do not actually come to the work. So this has been some kind of a guidance, but I would request both other panelists on this.
So just to quickly add, Suraj, you're perfectly correct. The Supreme Court has unfortunately not stepped in, and I think have given the government time to answer. Again, we're making it very India-centric, so apologies to other international panelists and attendees. But to add, I think certain states like Telangana and next to Andhra Pradesh have given the guidance that they have actually made pay cuts in the government itself. So they, for example, have said that pay cuts are fine, just don't take away jobs. So I think that's a more proactive, more pragmatic way of looking at things. We need to keep people in business. If to pay salaries, the company has to shut down, I think that's in the interest of nobody. So I think that would be my point, and I'll hand
It's
it back.
almost a good segue to another question, which goes down to how do we see courts would interpret cases when there is no force majeure clause? So in other words, there is obviously a force majeure situation, but how would courts interpret that? I believe it differs from country by country. So as we have this question in the Indian market right now, who feels compelled to answer the question with regard to India? Suraj maybe, or Deepo?
Sure, Reinhard. So from my perspective, I think whether the force majeure clause is there in the contract or not, there are two thoughts prevailing in the country across the globe. I've been seeing, is pandemic a force majeure or not? I think that's the question. We've been looking at a lot of jurisprudence is going to be evolved over a period of time. And this question will be answered as in specific to the instances rather than answering to the very generic perspective. That's my opinion here. Maybe he can reach out to us on offline. Maybe I'm happy to discuss with him and share my thoughts.
Yeah, and from an American perspective, I could not agree more. It will be driven down by facts, by the facts of the contract, what's driven by fairness, what are the expectations, whether it's a short-term contract or long-term contract, what good would a deal do when out of a sudden everybody goes bankrupt over fulfilling the words of the contract. So I would see it's a very much fact pattern driven scenario. So I believe we are at the end of our time, unless we have one upcoming very important thing which comes to our mind. Vinay, how about you take it back and you move it to the next level?
All right, great. Thank you so much. I can see that we were able to answer 4 live questions, and we have 4 outstanding questions. I would like to apologize for not being able to answer in respect of time, but we will definitely send these questions across to the panelists through an email, and as soon as we hear back, we can get back to you with the answers. So, and I would like to thank all the panelists. Thank you so much, dear panelists, for sharing your thoughtful insights and making this session very interesting and interactive. With this, we come to the end of the first session and first panel discussion. And but hang on, we have another amazing panel waiting to appear in front of you and discuss about law in the era of artificial intelligence. Once again, I would like to thank all the panelists, Reinhard for moderating the session, Satyajit Gupta, Surya Singh, and Deepa Lakshmi. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks,
and I think we can move on to the next session now. So without wasting any more time, let's welcome our esteemed panelists for law in the era of artificial intelligence. On the panel today, we have Mr. Steve Rosenborough. Steve is a senior attorney with Microsoft Corporation based in Redmond, Washington. He supports senior strategy teams servicing the financial service industry, as well as the media, entertainment, and telecom industry. Part of the functions includes helping customers undertake their digital transformation journey, which includes intelligent cloud service, AI, blockchain, IoT, data security and privacy, data governance, and cloud policies. Before transitioning to Microsoft, Steve served 18 years in various leadership roles. Steve is going to moderate this session for us. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Ms. Caroline Herzog. She is EVP, General Counsel, Company Secretary, and Chief Compliance Officer at ARM Limited, the world's leading semiconductor IP company based in San Jose, California. At ARM, Caroline leads worldwide legal, regulatory, and public affairs for the company. She provides strategic counsel to the CEO, board of the leadership team on a broad range of corporate, commercial, and regulatory issues. Prior to ARM, Caroline was Deputy General Counsel and CCO at Symantec Corporation, the world's largest cybersecurity company. Next, we have Mr. Kapil Chaudhary. He is Corporate Counsel India and SARC at Autodesk India. He is an established, motivated, and reputed artificial intelligence technology and data privacy focused lawyer with more than 19 years experience in general counsel leadership roles, advising on a wide variety of issues in multiple sectors in India and Singapore. Kapil writes a blog on the emerging issues in technology law, data privacy, and policy, as well as the legal, ethical, and governance frameworks for artificial intelligence and merging technologies. Last but not the least, we have Mr. Graham Lee. He is magistrate at Ministry of Justice, UK. For the past 13 years, he has been a magistrate, having a privilege to serve local community and provide an unbiased delivery of the law. After 25 years in the forces, serving in many areas of conflict in both fighting and humanitarian roles, he has been in the commercial sector in automation, robotic space for many years, and wounds and scars from being on the receiving end as far as the customer to the delivery on the vendor arena. He has experience with many different industries, from banking, finance, government, military, to heavy manufacturing, steelworks, to sportswear companies, as a mentor, a coach, and a leader. Now, I would like to hand over the platform to Steve to take this forward. And Steve, thank you so much for moderating the panel once again.
Thanks, Vinay. I appreciate it. AI is reshaping every single facet of our lives. And my wife asked me when several years ago, what is AI? And I gave her a brief tour of our home, a virtual tour. Our front door uses facial recognition and AI software to recognize when our delivery person is approaching. Our irrigation system for our lawn monitors weather forecasts from the U.S. National Weather Forecasting Department, and essentially tracks the precipitation rates, and then dynamically schedules when our lawn is watered, again, using AI. And even our productivity tools that I use, for whether it's PowerPoint or editing a document, goes back and looks at all of the work product that I've created over the last, let's say, 5 years, and offers up recommendations so I can repurpose content that I've created that's stored in the cloud. So with all of these different applications of AI that are really shaping and informing how humans can optimize their decision making, there are now real, very interesting and very important ethical questions that we as practitioners need to consider. And some of those ethical questions are kind of grounded in issues of fairness, of inclusiveness, of transparency, the reliability and safety of the AI applications that are integrated within the products and tools which we use. The questions of privacy and security, the privacy of our persons, of our homes, of our identities that utilize AI, and accountability. We want to know that the utilization of these AI applications and the companies that are applying them are fully accountable, the same way that as legal practitioners, we're advising our clients that they need to be accountable, or they need to think about their level of accountability in terms of the products and services that they're offering to their respective customers. So over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to touch on some of these principles as it relates to AI. But before we do, I would like to ask Graham if he would ground us in a solid definition of AI and machine learning. Graham?
Okay, thank you. Cheers, Steve. Thank you ever so much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, for wherever we are on this planet of ours. So one thing that we all use, and we use the word AI and artificial intelligence. Actually, AI is more than just artificial intelligence. It's emerging technologies. It's come from many, many years of what do we mean by learning. So, for instance, I'm a magistrate. I've been a magistrate, sat on the bench in many different criminal court cases, and I've sat in Crown Court as an appeals judge with the main judge. But we've all looked at, when we go to court and we look at court processes, we look at the paperwork, we look at the papers that are being served, we look at the papers and the evidence that's being submitted. So within the legal side, there's a hell of a lot that can be done. But also we've got to use that technology. So what I want to do is talk about some of the technologies that actually what we mean. So hopefully I'm not going to teach people to suck eggs, and I apologize, but however, my industry, which is the automation industry, is taking manual processes and putting them into a digital robot. It's not a robot that you see like R2-D2, C-3PO, etc. It is a digital robot. And that digital robot, or that process, is called RPA, Robotic Process Automation. It uses software with a potential artificial intelligence, or shall we say, an intelligence automation route. This is all about machine learning. It's about telling the machine what we want and how to learn and look for. So we've got RPA, Intelligent Automation. So there's another acronym. So RPA, IA, which is Intelligent Automation. But then part of that, we've also got what's known as NLP, not neuralistic, but natural language, where it takes the language that you have written and it combines that as an automated routine as a repetitive task. So that intelligent automation can automate non-routine tasks. So it's learning the way that you actually speak or the way that you write. So all this comes down to ML, which is machine learning. And this is a branch, and it's a very small branch, and it's slowly growing very wide in an artificial intelligence base. So it's trying to look at the decision of a human, what the human is going to do. Is it going to go left? Is it going to go right? Now, I'll give you a really good insight. Is Amazon, many years ago, used to sell these little dash buttons that you could press the button, it automate that you would get a certain food or a certain drink or whatever. By pressing the button, it goes to the internet. The internet will then charge your account, and then a day later you will get the cat food, dog food, or beer, whichever. So they knew what people were doing by people wanting to add these buttons onto their fridge doors. And over time, Amazon has actually identified the way that people behave, the way that you look at something, the way that you're going to go and grab something from that shop. So that natural language processing is also now visual. It can see what you're doing. But all this, and I mean all this, all comes down to data. And if you don't have a good data set or data lake, another terminology, this data and distinct pieces of information has got to be good enough so the automation process, or the AI, actually learns very, very quickly. So where did data come from? Data is all your work that you've got. We've got more data platforms and data lakes in this planet than we've actually got probably water that's actually covering the planet. Because every single thing that we're doing now is taking those switches from a computer, and that's all we are, is switching on and switching off. Loads and loads of ARM with Caroline's area is all about these computers, which are just switching on, switching off, switching on, switching off. What we need to do is record that information, and recording that information is called data, and that data is stored in lakes. So artificial intelligence came from around about the 1950s from a chap called James McCarthy, and he called it and he started looking into it, but also he started having that vision of where we want to go. So in my industry at the moment, there's new buzzwords which are coming, buzzwords such as hyper automation. It's where we actually get all these automation technologies all together to help you in the legal space, but also to help me when I'm sat on the bench, is that I've got all this information in front of me so I can make an informed decision. And that's what it's about. It's about an informed decision. So when we look at the legal processes, and when we look at how our private information is being secure, which such as blockchain, etc., we've got to bring all artificial intelligence together with all these separate parts of these emerging technologies. So that the time we actually come into, and when you start looking at You've got maritime law, you've got bankruptcy law, you've got corporate law, civil, criminal, entertainment, you name it, we've got all kinds of stuff. And one thing that I'm working with at the moment is working with the UK, with a company called Agilysys, and how we can help the Crown and the local enforcement officials to help them to move that forward. But also, when you've got all these robots working for you, we've also got to make sure they're efficient. So the question which I saw earlier on is, how do we make a legal company more efficient? So by giving you the time back to do your day job and not to sit in front of the computer typing out, why don't we use a robot, an attended robot, to help you to do your day-to-day job? So there's companies out there such as RPA Supervisor, Evolve AI, and then you've got all these vendors as well. And there's loads and loads of automation vendors, and they're all shouting about they've got AI, they've all got all this stuff. But one thing I strongly suggest, and it's something that I've already learned, is a lot of vendors are easy and they can sell snow. They can sell snow to Eskimos. But one thing about it is, from a legal point of view, always ask that question, is can you build it? Can you look after it? Can you maintain it? And that is where AI, what we've seen and what Steve mentioned earlier on, is how where we want to go. In less than a year, we will have an understanding of COVID. We'll have an understanding of how people look into their temperature. We've seen on the news lately how this virus is affecting us globally, and our data will be secure, how it's going to be secured globally as well. Steve, hopefully that introduction hopefully helps.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Graham.
I can go on for hours and hours. I love it.
No, it's terrific. You know, Carolyn, I'd love for you to help us pivot and focus on maybe one or two of the AI principles that I've kind of quickly blown through, and talk a little bit about bias and what does bias mean in connection with the application of AI.
Thank you, Steve. And those are great introductions. And this is, you know, by chance, it's such a wonderfully diverse panel to be able to talk about some of these issues. And, you know, and even coming from the perspective of my company, and looking at this panel, and I'm going to try not to screw it up because I saw Kapil's, you know, picture there, and you know, and I don't want to disappoint him. You know, and even just looking at my company and where I've come from, and sitting, you know, here, you know, I was, you know, I work for a British company in the semiconductor space. You know, I'm the first American woman. I'm actually the first general counsel not named Phil in my company, you know, owned by a Japanese company. And so there's a lot of sort of diverse perspectives, even just looking at this issue from the perspective of my company. And, you know, introducing this topic to my company, I thought it was maybe one of the first times when I sat at, you know, the executive table and I said, would you like me to talk about, you know, the ethics of artificial intelligence? And the CEO sort of rapidly responded and said, yes. No, never in my career have I brought up ethics at an executive table and had such a quick response when people said yes. And, you know, sort of turning from that perspective of law and sort of technology, and then sort of that human aspect of ethics is exactly why we're here and talking about this, right? Because if we turn around and talk to everybody in this audience, you know, that is the very nature of why this is so complex, because ethics is, you know, sort of any behavior that helps keep society together, right? And ethics are not law. Ethics inform law. And that is why it is so difficult to sort of define law by, you know, define ethics by an algorithm. It is incredibly complex to take a group of engineers and say, now go define that by an algorithm. And again, morality is sort of, again, what keeps us together in society, and behaving in a certain way. That's why we have codes of conduct. We're taking law and defining it by a code. It's something that's very difficult. We take our values and define it by a code. And so, you know, maybe, you know, I can start with a couple of stories, and, you know, I'll start with maybe I'll start from some older stories and move them forward. One of the most sort of earlier, you know, stories that was a company mishap around AI was in 2009, and Kodak, actually sort of an Asian company then, had actually had a mishap with their technology, And they found that when they were taking a picture, they, in taking a picture of an Asian person, it showed that person as having blinked, right? So again, sort of a mishap by Asian engineers, presumably, having a mishap with their artificial intelligence in their cameras, and sort of realizing that they were their facial recognition technology in their cameras was showing an Asian person as having blinked, so a mishap. Google had some problems with their facial recognition technology online, and they actually showed all humans at one point as being animals, so mishap, and then showing African Americans or people of African descent as being gorillas, so huge misstep, and obviously had to correct that very quickly. And then also, there was some, pictures of Native American dancers online, and they showed those as costumes, obviously not very culturally sensitive. So some stories like this that, were very, very interesting, and obviously some huge missteps very early on in sort of that facial recognition technology online. An interesting story from your own company, Steve. I saw something not that long ago where Melinda Gates actually called out a gaming company, and gaming is quite an interesting technology to be able to use bias in the machine. When you have only white male designers for gaming, she called out a company that there was a family that recognized that their teenage children, both male and female, could not adequately play a game because it was only designed by adult males. And so their children actually could not play a game. So it's really a call for addressing bias in the machine, and a call for having diversity in your engineering force to be able to address this. And then it goes to fear. So what are we really afraid of? We're informed by artificial intelligence very much by what we've seen in movies, what we've seen in books. And in order to address bias in the machine, well, one, I presume that we're not trying to eliminate bias. What we're trying to address is anything that is unfair or unlawful. So very complicated, very complicated in the judicial system, right? We're already also trying to see things that would be in the legal sphere, anything that would cause a fragmentation of regulation. So from the data privacy perspective, we have GDPR in the European Union, and that's something that is very helpful. It was a harmonization of law that allows technology and allows human beings to get a common understanding of law. Well, the fragmentation of regulation outside of the European Union causes a complexity of understanding what do we do with data. To Graham's point, what are we going to do with data? How do we process data? Well, with AI cannot possibly be successful if there's a massive fragmentation of regulation. It would be unfair, and it would certainly be biased if we don't know what to do with that data. So when we're dealing with, the understanding of, what to do with a bias, we believe, and I think that's a common principle in what we've seen, and certainly from ARM's Trust Manifesto, that every effort should be made to eliminate illegal and unfair bias in designing and developing AI. There's wide recognition that we should use training. I believe that a code of conduct for engineers should supplement company codes of conduct, and along with that, training and some view in terms of either committees or review committees to address the design and implementation, obviously helping with some type of diversity in the design to address things like the technology that is going out for gaming systems, and to ensure that that bias doesn't enter the AI system. And we're seeing lots of debates around this. So we've seen in certain cities already banning of facial recognition technology. We've seen confusion in the judicial system about how to use AI effectively, and thus banning AI systems because it's not being used in a fair way, and people don't understand it. And it goes again to the human factor of understanding the morality of making human decisions versus leveraging AI systems to address that bias that may go into a decision making. And I know we'll talk about transparency and explainability as well. So that factor of what am I controlling, what am I able to explain, and what is that pure bias in the system. So I'll pause there and we can continue the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Kapil, I'd love for you to touch on the issues of privacy and security as it relates to the application of AI, knowing that folks won't embrace this technology unless they feel safe.
Absolutely, Steve. Thank you. And thank you, Graham and Caroline, for setting that up so nicely. So, what I thought is privacy and AI, the interplay, I'll probably just take a step back and maybe just lay out the emerging regulatory frameworks and, what is it that we are actually dealing with out here. Now, if you look at the way the regulations are involved, and I think it'll be good for our audience to also kind of take a step back to see, around the late 2018, 2019, when the OECD adopted the recommendations on AI, they defined 5 value-based principles. To June of 2019, when the G20 actually adopted the human-centric approach to AI, there have been evolving regulatory regimes on data governance, AI governance across the entire landscape of Europe and the Asia Pacific, as well as the US. You'd be surprised if you say in July of 2017, China issued a national AI strategy, whereas it took India up to June 2018 to come up with a national AI strategy. And between that time, we had Japan, the French Data Protection Authority, and the House of Lords coming up with what you call the AI in the UK. And then the Hong Kong Privacy Commissioner issuing an ethical framework for advanced data processing in October 2018. So, why I wanted to set that out, and of course, then there are countries like Singapore announced the Model AI Governance Framework in 2019, January. Australia released a discussion paper proposing an AI ethics framework in April, and so on and so forth. Now, where that really ties nicely to where we are today is there are broadly 6 or 7 key regulatory themes emerging, and I think Caroline touched upon them pretty nicely. These are essentially the FAT principles, the fairness, accountability, and transparency principles. And then, very importantly, you have the human oversight element coming in, the privacy and data governance, and importantly, safety and security. Now, if I can just pause for a moment and walk you through, what the GDPR really lays out in front of us. So if you see, so maybe I'll take a step back and talk about the high level, the high level group that was set up by the European Commission, which came up with the AI, the framework for trustworthy AI. Now, so this was basically, an independent high level expert group on AI set up by the European Commission. And what they did is they came up with, key defining 4 ethical principles around AI, fairness, explainability, prevention of harm, and respect for human autonomy. And then just underneath those 4 ethical principles were 7 key requirements, both technical methods and non-technical methods. And one of the key requirements in that framework is the privacy and data governance framework. Now, if you really look at how this lays out very nicely with the GDPR is the GDPR essentially contains a lot of emphasis on data protection and by design and default, and some of those principles are now finding their way back into the way AI technologies are being drawn. So if you look at let's say an example of the way GDPR comprehensively guides the use of personal data throughout the life cycle of an AI tool, right from inception to deployment, and then the ultimate removal from the market. The GDPR rules are actually mirroring many of these HLEG principles and setting up what are kind of flowing back into what we are calling trustworthy AI or human-centric AI. And these are the similar requirements around accountability, privacy and data governance, human agency and oversight and non-discrimination and fairness. If I can just give you like one example, so you know, you see, we spoke about profiling and data analytics. So the GDPR in Article 22 specifically talks about data subject rights and automated decision making. And essentially the protection according to data subjects is that data subjects have a right not to be subject to a decision which is purely based on automated processing, which includes profiling. Now, if you have an AI tool or an AI system which is solely using automated processing, then you could then seek protection under Article 22 of the GDPR to, you know, at least claim a right to obtain human intervention and to contest that decision. So that's the neat interplay between the GDPR and a machine-based learning tool, and that's where the requirement for the human oversight principles are creeping into some of these regulatory frameworks. Now, the way, and I'll probably not touch upon a lot of these privacy principles, but just to give you an example. So let's say the GDPR talks about purpose limitation, which is you should only collect personal data of individuals limited to the purpose for which you're going to be using it. How that interplays and comes out in an AI environment is that, did we inform an individual that their personal data is going to be used by an AI tool? And did that consent, was that consent actually meeting the threshold of the consent requirements under the GDPR? Did the notice to the individuals sufficiently detail this requirement out? And is the intended purpose of processing then compatible with the purposes for which the original consent was taken, or did it actually change along the way? Because, as you know it, the AI tool goes through several levels of iteration. It keeps getting intelligent basis the data that is ingested. And so there are obviously fears around bias, discrimination, and false positives. So I'll probably pause here and say that it's a very interesting interplay between data protection, privacy by design and default. And if you look at all the emerging frameworks which are coming out from countries like, including Germany and Japan, you're all looking at the similar threads of and common themes emerging. And what this then does is, for lawyers and legal practitioners like ourselves, as well as for the companies that we serve, it's an interesting inflection point, because then, you can take a step back and say, here are the global governance standards, regulatory frameworks emerging on AI and data protection. Now, let's start identifying all our internal applications and tools where we are, either in-house, either applying licensed technology which we have developed in-house, or we are actually licensed in technology from outside, and then start looking at, a whole swath of issues around, IPR ownership, liability, product liability frameworks, privacy, as well as competition and consumer protection. So I hope I haven't kind of overcomplicated than what it already is, but it's a fascinating discussion. Back to you, Steve.
Thank you, Kapil. Graham, I'm coming to you next, because I'd like to actually have you share with us this whole notion of AI and augmenting human decision-making, and what that might mean, and in some instances does mean, in the court systems. And I think you have a unique perspective on that.
Yeah, I do. There's technologies out there. I'll just give you one, for instance, called Munoya. So it's a Belgian company, and they actually read handwriting, and it's near enough 100% successful at reading Arabic. And how do we bring that, especially into authentication? And how do we bring authentication, verification, and actually you are the right person? And how we bring AI together is, we've got that visual. So Kapil was talking about the rules, and we've got to make sure we've got rules on both sides. So when I say both sides, we've got the people who are criminal, and we've got those who are law-abiding. And that is how we've got to make the law. From my perspective, where I'm sat, the law should be black and white, but however, we know that there's certain ways we can get around those little law because we've got certain bylaws, etc. So give you an insight of voice analytics. So voice analytics, there's a company in America called Starkey, and they provide unique, and I mean it's unique, audio wearing hardware for those people who've got disabilities or hard of hearing. It is far greater and better than those there. Yeah, I don't want to say who we are, but we know who they are. But it uses 5G technology. It uses Siri. It uses Google. It uses voice analytics. It uses voice to translation, voice to text. So how do we take that securely for somebody who has got hard of hearing, and also those people who are visually impaired as well? How do we look after their data? And how do we know that my Alexa that's sat behind me is not listening to every conversation I'm taking? Because we do know it does. We've asked it and it will do. It's just waiting. So if I shout Alexa, it will then now come on. And I suppose if everybody else is listening and I shout Alexa, what's the time? Everybody, it then answers. So I've now got 50 plus people, Alexa's in their ring, giving people the right time. But how do we do that? How do we stop that? And it's understanding that next version is authentication. That when I ask my Alexa, when I ask my devices, either on my watch or on my phone, it knows it's me. And then we've got to keep that secure. So that security with AI and how we move it forward is how we look at the next stages. Hopefully that helps.
Let me do a quick follow-up. Are you at all concerned that judges, magistrates will augment their decision-making in terms of sentencing and sentencing guidelines through the use of AI? I mean, that's one areas that I have a lot of conversation with court systems and about on a global basis. Okay,
so the court system's down to the local government, and the amount of money that you need to augment to get hyper automation live within a court system is going to cost the earth. It is not a very cheap resource technology to move forward. However, in the UK, we do have virtual courts, so that the prisoner or the defendant or whatever stays where they are. There's no transport needed. But however, the whole end-to-end of the way that the court system works is not the way that how I, from a commercial background, would expect to work. A court opens at 10 o'clock in the morning. A court closes at 5 o'clock at night. That building alone is still there for 24 hours and Saturday and Sundays, etc. So it takes the mindset, it takes the culture of change to accept that technology is there to help, but not to replace. And that is key. The human is still faster. The human can still make a very split-fine decision. At that point, when the human is being replaced by an intelligent piece of software, and that's what it is, it's software in a device which has got the right technology with the right chip and everything else, at that point, we'll then be able to put the human in the loop. And that's crucial as well. It's putting the human in the loop. It's making that human the deciding factor and not having the robot or the technology to make that deciding factor. It is the human de facto. So for instance, what Kapil and Carolyn were saying, it is about ethics. It's about those AI ethics, the physical hardware, the software that comes together to make that decision. And I will probably see it in about 20 years' time within the court system, because the technology is quite expensive.
Carolyn, same question, but I'm going to try to couch it in a slightly different way. Any concerns you see in terms of accountability in utilizing AI technology as it relates to decision-making, augmenting our human decision-making with respect to the court systems with respect to how we hire people and making those workforce decisions.
Well, I think if we talk about just adding it to the legal profession, right? So I think it wouldn't add to necessarily what Graham is saying. I think there's a lot of things in terms of the criminal justice system and sentencing guidelines and things like that, where there's a lot of things that are happening where people want assurance that there's that transparency in the decision making, and certainly from a bias perspective, we have lots of issues in the United States with issues of bias and decision making, where frankly, I think AI can be extremely beneficial to address the issues of bias and transparency, and could help with those issues of bias, still turning it over to a human, and you can have a check in the human. So I think that augmentation that Graham addresses is a huge factor and can address issues of bias. And again, not necessarily eliminating the issue of bias, but that augmentation can be hugely beneficial in addressing questions and sort of looking at algorithms to have that check in place. In the legal profession, there's definitely where areas where we're using AI that create opportunities for efficiency. And there's always those questions of people being afraid, again, is AI going to replace the human? And one of the the world doesn't need any more ditch diggers is sort of the old line, right? So obviously once upon a time we were using horse and buggies, and now we have cars, and I don't think people necessarily regret that we're not driving horse and buggies anymore. There's a displacement, but then there's new roles. And we have, one of the things that we look at in the principles around AI is, what are we doing to train the next generation? Well, not all the training is going to happen in training people to do AI. Some theories are that maybe we're going to be a caring generation in the future, right? We need more people. And look at the current situation that we're in. When I started talking about this, I didn't anticipate certainly that we were going to be dealing with COVID-19, but goodness gracious, we need more people in the healthcare industry, and to support those people in the healthcare industry. So that certainly would be something, and we need AI to be doing predictive algorithms to help with the predictability of this COVID-19 virus and how do we treat it. In the legal profession alone, we are certainly not going to pay outside counsel to do document review for us, and AI is being used for that, and that's incredibly useful. But I do not predict that Graham's position is going to be replaced, although he's talking about some areas where maybe we're going to be using AI. But we need legal advisors, we need people to do analytics, we need people to be great thinkers, and we're using AI certainly in in our patent review right now. We can't look at the patents themselves, but in the algorithms to be looking at, are we leveraging the right patents, the most valuable patents? Are we designing patents in the most important areas, to be making sure that we are investing our resources to do the most valuable work? That is incredibly valuable for our organization right now. So always, I think, in the in-house world, and no doubt for outside counsel, we're trying to figure out, where do we put our work and our greatest minds to do the most valuable work for society? And I'd like to think that that is where AI is really focused. How do we use humans to do the most valuable work, whether that's caring, whether that's intellectual work, the most valuable work? There's always going to be a broad range, but I think AI as an augmentation of humanity is a great way to think about it.
Kapil, are we going to see lawyers, in-house lawyers, external counsel losing their jobs in droves because of AI?
Great question, Steve. So, Steve, we've been some of the Indian law firms, and just like our American counterparts and the European counterparts, have been increasingly looking at AI systems, such as I was at a webinar just yesterday with this company from Canada called Kira Systems, right? You may have heard about them, and Kira was talking about things around how the impact on the legal profession around M&A transactions, how they could do a due diligence pretty quickly, how coming out of the COVID-19 situation, the in-house lawyers are going to start demanding a lot of truly client-centric arrangements from law firms, they're probably looking at moving away from hourly rates to fixed fee cap arrangements, increasing utilization of legal technology, so just to augment what Caroline said was, while say a company like Kira Systems or these other AI-enabled tools can assist in-house lawyers and law firms from say by doing preliminary assessments on say, hey, what are your force majeure clauses in leases? What are your insured risks in a tenancy agreement? And so on and so forth. The ultimate analysis and the legal analysis has to be done by a human lawyer because, an AI tool will only give you data that is as good as the data that's ingested. And that data, for all you know, could be faulty, right? Because it could be false negatives or false positives. So I would answer that by saying AI tools are going to become increasingly relevant in the post-COVID-19 environment where, we are going to be faced with enormous pressures for quick turnarounds and to show our value to our organizations, but that human decision-making element is going to always remain. Back to you, Steve.
Thank you. Our conversation is not focused on COVID-19, but you've raised an interesting issue because there's a lot of discussion around tracking, identifying individuals that may have come in contact with COVID, this whole notion of civil liberties, of privacy, and as legal practitioners, we're focused on that. And there's this other notion of utilizing smart technology, AI, essentially, to help augment our human decision-making as to whether or not I can enter into a building, I can purchase goods or services. Graham, would love you to kind of talk to us about this from your experiences in dealing with technology. What does this mean? Now, if I have to go into the courts in the UK, will my civil liberties be in jeopardy by virtue of what's on my smartphone?
So courts in the UK, like probably courts around the world as well, the first thing you do when you walk through that door is you walk through a metal detector. One is to make sure that you're not going to harm anybody else, but also those people in the court and the courtrooms are actually secure. So that's number one. Number two is technology. There's no technology allowed in the courtrooms. You can take it in, but it's not there to be disrupting, and you can't record anything at this present time of any cases that goes on. If it's a youth court, there's certain rules that the court are aware that there's no recording, no names, and etc. That's to protect everybody in that courtroom. So when we're using technology, I don't know, and it means I don't know that I can't make sure that anybody's not recording that. I can't do that. But however, there's technology out there. There's technology that would actually call an inhibitor, which inhibits your phone from connecting to the network. There's software there. It's there and available. The hardware and the software will actually falsify the communication signal between you and the broadcasting tower. That's against the law. You're not allowed to do that. You're interrupting the signal. So there's another law. So all this stuff comes from my military background, where I moved the British forces, part of the huge team, where we moved them from analog radio systems to a digital radio system, so that we knew that where every single soldier was out on the ground. We used IP addressing for the radio systems, so we knew exactly who, where, and what, and how. We had 255 channels on the radio. Why? Because that's an IP channel. So when you bring technology into the court, you can do things, but it's against the law. So I can't inhibit you from using your technology that you've bought from somebody, from a cell provider, because you've come into a government building. However, we can, and we have done, is that we will take your device off you and put it in a secure vault for you. And that's the next technology. But also, what do we do with watches? So watches are recording devices. earsets are recording devices. So we've just got to make sure is that we abide by the current law. If the law has got to change, we've got to change it. And the way that Kapil and Karen were saying about how we look at that is how we look at it so we don't inhibit the way that we grow with technology. Technology is there to help us. Technology is there helping us with COVID-19. I've got an app on my phone. I use COVID-19 to say that everybody in the family are all okay. There's 2.5, 2.6 million users on this app that's saying that exactly the same. So we're using technology to our best. Now, I can't stop any cell tower from sending that data, but that data is still there. That data is still moving on. So it's how we manage that in a courtroom, a public building, in military security compounds. That is done. Your how do you put it? I won't say your human rights have been removed, but you are now under the law of the military, and the military have got very stringent certain security restrictions that you abide to. The civilian side is slightly different, and that is where you've got some draconian decisions to make, but also you've got some very liberal decisions that you're going to remove some human rights by removing certain technology and advantages of technology. And that is where a government, that is where the law, and this is down to the legal advice and the judges of the land, will actually come up with what's coming next. That's for me.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay.
Well said. I think we could probably pressure test your position for the next hour, but unfortunately,
there's lots. I love it.
Or at least the next 15 minutes. But I believe we're at least I believe we're out of time, if I'm mistaken. Vinay, am I right?
That's right. We are 4 minutes over the time schedule, and thankfully we had a couple of questions but they were already answered by Graham. So he answered them while Carolyn and Kapil were talking. So he was quite quick to go ahead and answer them. Thank you so much, Graham, for that. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, all the attendees, for being so attentive and keep asking questions. We had so many questions when you registered, and I'm sure we were able to answer most of them. But if in case there are more questions, please feel free to email us, and we will try and have you answers from our experts. With this, I would like to thank everyone once again for joining in. Please stay tuned for our next webinar and our conferences. And we're going to post a lot of expert interviews from experts from around the globe on artificial intelligence, on COVID, and a lot of other legal issues and questions. Thank you so much once again for joining in. Have a great day ahead. Thank you so much.